The first item of business is portfolio questions. And the first portfolio is Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform. I would remind members that questions 2, 3, 4 and 8 will be grouped together. And I call question 1, Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken to support community land ownership in the south of Scotland region.
The Scottish Government
The Scottish Government supports community land ownership through legislation guidance, provision of advice to community groups and by making available grant funding for communities to acquire land or land assets. Since 2016, the Scottish Land Fund has awarded £272,000 to 25 groups in the south of Scotland to carry out feasibility studies into buying land or buildings for community use. And of these, 17 groups to date have gone on to secure approval to acquire the assets in question with funding of just over £1.99 million.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary is aware that of the 560,000 acres of land in community ownership in Scotland, almost 530,000 are in the Highlands and Islands, but so far just 800 acres are in the south of Scotland regions of Dumfries and Galloway and the borders. But given there's been a real explosion of interest in community land ownership in the south of Scotland in recent months, for example, Langham Moor, Wanlockhead and also Dumfries Town Centre, will the Cabinet Secretary consider if there's anything more the Government could do to support potential community landowners in the south of Scotland where the need to tackle the economic challenges is as strong as it is in the Highlands and Islands?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Aware of the motion that was lodged by the member and it had some cross-party support and I am therefore aware of the figures that he's founding his question on. There's a couple of things I should say about that. First of all, that is looking at it in terms of acreage, but of course sometimes a community right to buy might be of a much smaller package that can have make a massive difference in a local community. But also, he is right to talk about a more recent explosion in interest. And I think it's fair to say that in the south of Scotland, there was a kind of slowness to think about community right to buy as something that really applied in their area. And they've now, I suspect, woken up to the opportunities that there are here. Given the inception of community right to buy, Scottish ministers have assisted in setting up 32 compliant community bodies in the south of Scotland area, and that has resulted in 39 applications. And those community bodies have purchased land and buildings through the appropriate legislation. And I'm sure the member is aware of the most recent one, so I won't just list those. But I should also flag up that the advent of South of Scotland enterprise is one where we expect the South of Scotland enterprise to take a positive and practical role in working directly with communities, and that could include working with existing legislation designed to encourage and support the ownership and control of assets by communities. And that, of course, would include community right to buy. I'm perfectly able to give the member a great deal more detail if he wishes it, but I don't want to provoke the ire of the presiding officer.
Question number 2, Mike Rumbles.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the 12-point plan published by the Climate Emergency Response Group on the 26th of August.
Rosanna Cunningham.
The 2019-20 programme for government contained a point-by-point response from the Scottish Government to the 12-point plan published by the Climate Emergency Response Group. And I hope that the member has seen that between him having been required to lodge this question and actually look at the PFG.
Mike Rumbles.
I'm interested in focusing on one of the 12 points in the plan, which is the £100 million Agricultural Modernisation Fund for zero-interest loans for investment and improvements that will secure a reduction in emissions. Would the Cabinet Secretary accept this request for investment and commit to this being new money and not money taken from the current funds for agricultural support from the agricultural portfolio or from her own?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, I think the member will probably realise that I can't make that kind of commitment on behalf of my colleague Fergus Ewing. I know that Fergus is particularly keen to ensure that any agricultural transformation programme does deliver right across the board in terms of things like sustainability, etc. Obviously, there is a budget process to go through, and there may be additional funding implications in that budget. But I think those would be matters for the appropriate Cabinet Secretary to deal with, although I'm sure he will be happy to engage directly with Mike Rumbles on that.
Neil Findlay, question number 3.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to address climate change.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Scotland is a world leader in the fight against climate change. We have almost halved emissions since 1990, while growing the economy, increasing employment and productivity. The concrete actions we will take to address climate change are set out in our climate change plan, which was published in February 2018. We've already committed to updating that plan within 6 months of the Climate Change Bill receiving royal assent, and we're looking across our responsibilities to make sure we continue with the policies that are working and increase action where necessary. The programme for government outlines the areas where we will do this, including measures on transport, green finance, land use and through investing in innovation.
Neil Findlay.
The cycle to work schemes encourage many people to buy a bike and use it for work. The UK Government are expanding the cap on the scheme so that people can purchase electric bikes. Now, I know that cycling is not in the Cabinet Secretary's remit, but given that air pollution and other areas are, will she lobby her ministerial colleagues to see if there are other ways in which we can increase the incentives for people to take up the use of e-bikes?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Can I reassure the member that my ministerial colleagues are probably fed up with me lobbying them on a variety of different issues, but I can absolutely undertake to continue to do so across the board in respect of the sorts of activities that will be required for us to reduce climate emissions. And that will include continuing to focus on alternative modes of transport, such as cycling.
Question number 4, Stuart Stevenson.
The Scottish Government what action it has taken to tackle the climate emergency.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Obviously, I gave an answer to Neil Findlay on this topic. The 2019-20 programme for government outlines the need to respond to the global climate emergency and the actions the Scottish Government is taking to do so. For example, developing and publishing a climate emergency skills plan builds the right skills into Scotland's workforce to take advantage of new areas of investment.
Stuart Stevenson.
Is the Cabinet Secretary aware that in a Quinnipiac University-run national poll last week, 67% of US voters supported doing more to address climate change? Is this further confirmation that the climate emergency is now recognised worldwide and requires a substantial response from every country, including our own?
Rosanna Cunningham.
It may not surprise the member if I say that I was unaware of that very specific poll from Quinnipiac University. However, I'm not sure that the results surprise me enormously. It's encouraging to see that more US voters want action to address climate change. The global climate emergency does need a global response, and while we can lead by example, and indeed we will end Scotland's contribution to climate change by 2045, we do need the rest of the world to follow that lead and work collaboratively with us to tackle this global climate emergency. I'm reassured as well when I meet representatives from many of the state legislatures in the United States who have maintained and want to forge ahead with their commitments to reducing emissions. And the sum total of their efforts, I think, will still mean that we are getting a contribution from the United States.
Question number 8, Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it works with the agricultural sector to maximise the potential that farmers have to help achieve our climate change targets.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, we're on track to meeting Scotland's world-leading climate change targets, with emissions down by 47% between 1990 and 2017. And Scottish farmers already play a key role in this progress, including contributing to emissions reduction through forestry, land use and electricity generation. The Scottish Government is working with the agriculture sector to do even more. Our initiatives include encouraging more tree planting and agroforestry on farms, promoting the multiple benefits of good grassland and grazing management, encouraging farmers to invest in renewable energy, and developing models to demonstrate and promote carbon-neutral farms.
Gail Ross.
Thank you. The IPCC report recently stated that we should look at reducing our meat intake to help the environment, and this has led to farmers being unfairly targeted. Does she agree that agricultural practices are different here and that there are Scottish farmers that are leading the way in best practice and that should be recognised?
I think we all
Rosanna
recognise that Scots need to significantly increase the fruit and vegetable part of their diets. That's a simple health message that in most countries is one which I think health authorities would wish to work on. But the Scottish Government does recognise the benefits of a healthy, balanced diet, and that it does include lean, quality red meat. And Scotland produces some of the best quality grass-fed red meat in the world. And many farmers are already choosing sustainable methods of production and land use. It's important that that story is told, but also that more farmers are encouraged to play their own part in helping to reduce emissions in Scotland and end climate change, particularly through the Agriculture Transformation Programme announced yesterday in the Programme for Government. And I would recommend to members who are at all interested in this, if they wish to know more about some of the research that's been done in Scotland, some of the world-leading research that's being done in Scotland on this work, to be in touch with the SRUC and those other research institutes who are conducting that work. It's extremely important for the future of agriculture in Scotland, which has a very good story to tell.
Now, I have a lot of supplementary requests, so I'll do my best to take as many as possible. Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In terms of tackling climate change, yesterday's programme for government promised to accelerate Scotland's energy retrofit scheme to reach EPC Band C by 2030. Why did the SNP vote against Scottish Conservative amendments to achieve this previously?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, I don't have a specific recollection of the detail of Scottish Conservative amendments, but I rather suspect they were worded in such a way as to make it almost impossible to actually support. And the members are shaking their heads, but they know exactly what I mean in this regard. Our commitment and our drive forward in terms of renewable energy is absolutely second to none. Frankly, would be helped a lot more if we could get the UK government to step up on this instead of cutting the legs out from a great deal of industry, of renewable industry, cutting the subsidies, and in those circumstances, could I strongly advise, instead of the wordplay that undoubtedly would have been part of any amendment that the Tories had, that they get on to their colleagues down south and see if they can find a little chink in all the chaos to have a proper conversation about what's actually needed for the future of not just Scotland, but the UK.
Gillian Martin.
Sorry, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary, over the summer we've had forest fires across the Amazon, we've had Great Barrier Reef in peril. Can other countries learn anything from the Scottish Government's programme for government on tackling climate change?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, I mean, I would say, but it is true that Scotland is leading its way in our actions. We were one of the first countries in the world to declare a global climate emergency and followed that declaration with a world-leading net zero target and a programme for government that has prioritised tackling climate change. So I look forward to discussing that programme in the debate that follows portfolio questions. The fight to save the Amazon forest, the world's biggest land-based carbon sink, does show the importance of global cooperation in tackling climate change. And I hope that other nations will join us in committing to end their contribution to climate change. And I know my colleague sitting here, Fergus Ewing, is going to be playing a very direct part in that, encouraging the increased planting of trees in Scotland. We can't probably make up for the number of trees that have been lost in the Amazon, but we can do our bit, and if every country does its bit, it will help enormously.
Andy Whiteman.
Presiding Officer, the Cabinet Secretary talks about deforestation. The programme for government does promise an extra £5 million and an increase to 12,000 hectares in the planting target. But she will know that hundreds of thousands of acres of land in Scotland are very ready to regenerate, and they're only being stopped by grazing and burning. So does she agree with me that the 12,000 hectare planting target should be matched by a 12,000 native forest regeneration target through statutory regulation of rural upland land use and stopping the farming subsidies that are actively contributing to deforestation over much of Scotland?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, first of all, we are obviously doing way more tree planting in Scotland proportionate to the rest of the UK than anywhere else in the UK. And that's an important thing to note. Secondly, not quite sure what the member is actually suggesting there. Do we sweep away people from about 70% of our land, stop the food production, which is the only form of food production that is feasible on that land, and then what? I'm a little bit uncertain as to what kind of future the member is actually suggesting for Scotland, but I see the current land use, particularly those areas where, for example, and I refer to an earlier question, where the form of food production which is possible there is the only form of food production that can be undertaken on that land. Taking that out of food production, I'm not sure in the longer term is the most sensible way forward.
Question number 5, Angela Constance.
To ask the Scottish Government how water pollution is being reduced in the Almond Valley constituency.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Oh, it's actually me.
Oh, terribly sorry. Marie Goujon.
The Scottish Government supports ongoing work by SEPA and Scottish Water to reduce water pollution in the Almond Valley. As well as protecting the River Almond catchment from pollution incidents, SEPA is undertaking a wide range of initiatives to improve environmental water quality.
Angela Constance.
Thank the Minister for a reply. The River Almond has received significant investment to enable the return of Atlantic salmon, eels, lamprey, but the river is still downgraded due to water quality and many other issues, including spillage of untreated sewage litter. And this has been ongoing for years. So what commitment can the Minister give to ensure that local people can be confident on the quality of the water for both wildlife and recreational use?
Marie Goujon.
I'm aware of the work that the member has been undertaking in this, but I would say that through river basin management planning, the Scottish Government and SEPA have prioritised action on the River Almond to remove barriers to fish and improve water quality where it has been downgraded. Scottish Water respond to any pollution incident as an absolute priority, and when a wastewater sewer collapsed in May 2019, which was causing pollution of the River Almond, work was carried out immediately to fix that problem and to clean up the watercourse. Now, following the River Almond strategic study, Scottish Water and SEPA are prioritising long-term upgrades to Scottish Water's assets that will provide water quality improvements for the local community and for wildlife.
Question number 6, Bill Bowman.
Government what its position is on whether the holistic approach taken in the UK Government's Clean Air Strategy 2019 could be applied to Scotland in order to reduce carbon and other such emissions.
Rosanna Cunningham.
The Scottish Government commissioned report of the independent review of Scotland's Cleaner Air Scotland strategy was published last week. The report sets out a number of recommendations for building on our achievements to date in reducing air pollution. We will consider these recommendations and consult on proposals for a revised air quality strategy in due course, and I would recommend that the member, if he hasn't already sourced a copy of that independent review, that he should do so.
Bill Bowman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the response. It has been reported that 3 of Scotland's 10 most polluted streets are in Dundee, and we now know that the development of a low emission zone for Dundee will not be published until March next year. Does the Minister consider this acceptable progress, considering we are in a climate emergency?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, I would, of course, want there to be really fast progress right across the board, but we always understood that the first 2 cities that would come forward with LEZs would be Glasgow and Edinburgh. Dundee are working hard on the low emission zone. There are indeed hotspots in Dundee, as there are in a number of other places, but I know that the process of establishing a low emission zone is progressing. If the member hasn't felt that he's had enough information about that, then I would be happy to ensure that he is given up-to-date briefing. But I do know that they are on track. I would always want to encourage local authorities to do more if they could do it. But of course, as always, we are not in the process of dictating to local authorities, and I wouldn't have expected the Conservatives would wish me to do so either.
That concludes questions on environment, climate change and land reform, and we shall move on to the next portfolio, which is rural economy. We now commence portfolio questions on rural economy, and I would remind members that questions 1 and 5 will be grouped together, and can I also remind members that supplementaries from those other than the questioners all get taken at the end of the grouping. Okay, question number 1, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the findings of the Anderson Centre research on the impact of a no-deal Brexit on farm incomes.
Mary Goujon.
We note the publicity around the Anderson Centre report, and its conclusions echo those of other research and analysis that's been conducted, including by this government. Now, while there will be variation in the severity of impacts, there is no single part of the rural economy which will not be adversely impacted by a no deal. And the fact that a no deal is still being contemplated is completely reckless, and it shows how little this Tory UK government cares about the fates of thousands of people in rural communities across Scotland. And that's why we will continue to do all we can to absolutely avoid a no deal.
Richard Lyle.
Can I thank the Minister for her answer? The report highlighted what we have always known to be the case, that leaving the EU without a deal would be a disaster for Scotland's farmers, and I welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to provide some certainty to farmers in the delivery of the current loan scheme offer. Has the UK Government given any indication that they are seeking to protect Scottish farming, be that in the form of funding post-2020 or an appropriate immigration system for Scotland's soft fruit sector, amongst others?
Mary Goujon.
I wish I could say that they have, but the UK Government has provided nothing but uncertainty for Scottish farming, and we're now only 57 days away from potentially leaving the EU without a deal. Now, the member mentioned in his supplementary about the immigration system, and this is an area which is a massive concern for the rural economy, but I would say for our whole economy as a whole. The UK Government introduced a seasonal workers pilot scheme to secure 2,500 workers across the whole of the UK. Now, that whole scheme isn't enough to satisfy the labour needs in my own constituency, let alone across the whole of Scotland or across the whole of the UK. And with current immigration proposals the way they are, that situation is only going to get worse. We simply cannot rely on the UK Government to resolve this with their increasingly hostile environment. And that's why we want to see and we need to see migration devolve to Scotland. And in the meantime, we've absolutely committed to working with rural businesses and industries to encourage more of their employees to stay in Scotland. And we'll continue to work with our soft fruit and seasonal vegetable sectors to better understand the challenges that they face in relation to their workforce needs.
Question number 5, Tom Arthur.
To ask the Scottish Government what impact a no-deal Brexit could have on the agricultural sector in the Renfrewshire South constituency.
Mary Goujon.
No-deal Brexit would be catastrophic for farmers and the farming industry in Mr Arthur's Renfrewshire constituency, as it will be right across Scotland. And we will do what we can with the powers that we have, but as we're saying more generally, we will not be able to prevent or mitigate against all the impacts. Scotland was the first within the UK to offer advance payments by way of a loan scheme to farmers and crofters to help address concerns and to help maintain that vital cash flow within the rural economy.
Tom Arthur.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer, and she will be aware that farmers operating within my constituency and the wider area have been engaged in a range of diverse activities, including planting trees. Can she advise what funding will be available for farmers like these to continue planting trees, diversifying incomes and contributing to our climate change efforts if we have to leave the EU? And can I extend an invitation to the Minister to come to my constituency to meet with farmers firsthand?
Mary Goujon.
I thank the member for that question. I'd be absolutely delighted to go to his constituency and meet anybody who has concerns or would like to discuss those with me. And I'm glad that he's raised the point of forestry, because in yesterday's programme for government announcement, we announced our intention to create 12,000 hectares of new woodland this year, and that's 2,000 more than the climate change plan target. However, the UK Government are yet to confirm future funding and, in particular, relation to forestry. Now, so far, the UK Government has committed to the same cash total in funds for farm support till the end of the Parliament, but it still hasn't set out exactly what farm support means, despite our repeated calls for clarity on that. So the programme for government also makes clear that we'll be continuing to press them for that clarity that farming and forestry so desperately need.
Short supplementary, please. Colin Beattie.
The British Egg Industry Council have recently contacted me with concerns about catastrophic tariffs and lowered food standards in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Will the Scottish Government continue to pressure this reckless UK Government to abandon the notion of leaving the EU with a no-deal Brexit in order to protect our industries and the quality of produce that we consume?
Marie Goujon.
Absolutely. And as I said in response to Tom Arthur's question, I mean, a no-deal Brexit would be absolutely catastrophic for Scotland. And it's our primary producers who would really feel the brunt of that, particularly when we look at tariffs and when we look to the likes of red meat and sheep meat in particular. Now, we are a responsible government and we will continue to do everything we can to prepare for that, but it just simply isn't possible for us to mitigate against all the impacts of leaving the EU without a deal, and that is why a no deal must be removed as an option. Thank you.
Question number 2, Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what impact Brexit could have on farming in Scotland and what action it will take to maintain current agricultural standards and measures.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, no-deal Brexit will be catastrophic for Scotland and our farming industry, and this, coupled with a lack of certainty for future support payments, means many businesses will be facing a cliff edge. Rural areas are particularly vulnerable because they are dependent on particular sectors like farming. Sheep farmers are particularly at risk, with UK sheep meat exports worth £390 million a year, of which almost all goes to the EU. The prospect of 40 to 50% tariffs being imposed on these exports would be devastating. So it's essential sheep farmers are compensated if we leave the EU without a deal.
Bill Kidd.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that information. Can I ask what measures are in place to protect plants from disease if Scotland has to leave the EU?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the EU is an important resource for knowledge and disease surveillance for aiding Scotland in taking preventative measures in protecting our plants for the incoming threat of new pests and disease. This is an extremely important area, and I'm grateful the member has raised it. So we believe exiting the EU is not in our interests. We've been preparing Scottish legislation so our existing protective measures continue to be robust on exit, and we remain committed to adhering to current and future EU standards and regulations.
Question number 3 was not lodged. Question number 4, Jackie Bailey.
To ask the Scottish Government what the value is of Scotch lamb exports to Europe.
Fergus Ewing.
Information from Quality Meat Scotland is that almost £31 million worth of Scotch lamb was exported to Europe in 2018, accounting for approximately 22% of the sector's income for the year.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response? Lamb prices are, of course, okay at the moment, but hill farmers are concerned about the potential reduction in the value of lamb and the loss of the EU market. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what contingency measures he has in place to assist hill farmers post-EU subsidy in the event of a fall in the value of lamb?
Fergus Ewing.
I'm not sure that Jackie Bailey's entirely correct in that information I got just in the last couple of days indicated that at a market in, I think, Newton Stewart, the prices fell by about 20%. We do, however, keep a close price monitoring on the figures from all marts, but I would say that we are concerned not only about the fall in beef prices and rising costs, but also of the overall financial position facing the sheep sector. I mean, I am able to say that one of the things that we have done, I'm pleased that we are doing this, is to arrange that every farmer and crofter and land manager entitled to receive Pillar 1 payments will receive payments at the earliest possible date. And 95% of all eligible claimants have received a loan offer. About half have been returned. I would urge those who haven't done so to do so that they can obtain their 95% of their full entitlement by the beginning of October. And that money in the bank, I think, is the most practical thing we can do in the short term. But if the loss of EU markets for lamb takes place because of the high tariffs, then it is the responsibility of the UK government to come up with a compensation scheme based on a headage payment on breeding ewe numbers with 218 historic information. That is the only way that we can administer quickly and successfully a compensation scheme, but far better not to have the problem arise in the first place, far better to avoid a no-deal Brexit.
Question number 6, Graham Simpson.
To ask the Scottish Government when it plans to publish a national development plan for crofting.
Fergus Ewing.
As set out in our programme for government, the National Development Plan for crofting will be published in the coming year.
Graham Simpson.
Thank you for that answer. I was hoping the Cabinet Secretary might enlighten us on what the statement next week on crofting might include. Could it include something about the National Development Plan for crofting, which was actually promised in last year's programme for government, as was a crofting bill, which has yet to appear, and that's disappeared from this year's programme for government? Perhaps you can tell us what's happened to that.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the member is correct in one respect that there is intended to be a crofting statement next week, and if I were to accept his invitation to say what is in that statement, prima facie, presiding officer, I would be in clear breach of every parliamentary rule that's been written. So, with respect, I won't accept that invitation, as the member will understand. I'm very proud that in 2018 we saw over 200 new entrants into crofting. In the last financial year, we've provided crofting businesses with over £46 million in funding. In the financial year 18-19, we approved over 618 crofting agricultural grant scheme applications. I've driven this forward. I'm proud, presiding officer, that so far as the crofters are concerned in Scotland, we're getting on with the day job, whilst his colleagues in Westminster have apparently abandoned it altogether.
Question number 7, Maurice Corey.
Thank you, presiding officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to take forward the beef efficiency scheme.
Fergus Ewing.
The beef efficiency scheme is presently in the third year of a 5-year scheme. We expect to be able to continue the scheme as is until its conclusion. That does, however, depend, presiding officer, on the UK Government including the beef efficiency scheme within its commitment to maintain farm support until 2022. Any decisions on a future scheme can only be made once there is clarity and certainty from the UK Government on future funding, which at present there is not.
Maurice Corey.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, but the available budget in the beef efficiency scheme stands at £600,000 as of August 2019 this year. Can I ask if the Cabinet Secretary can give any further detail on exactly how these funds would be allocated and within what time frame to support beef farmers and optimise sustainability across Scotland's beef livestock would you consider?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the member will know that the funding available in the beef efficiency scheme is being front-loaded. That's the nature of the scheme, and that, I think, was welcomed by all those who chose to participate. And I'm very pleased that, I believe, unlike in other parts of the UK, we were able to support our beef sector with this scheme. So I'm very happy to discuss any proposal the member may have in future. But I think the starting point is this, that Mr Gove, in his Health and Harmony paper, basically said that direct support for farmers should cease by 2027. So his asking me for more money for this scheme and that runs contrary to the fact that the UK Government planned to scrap all support payments for food production in just a fairly short number of years time. I think there's just a little bit of inconsistency there, Presiding Officer.
Supplementary from Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just for clarification, can the Cabinet Secretary advise if there is an equivalent scheme elsewhere in the UK? And if there is there anything that we can learn from it to support our beef farmers?
Ferguson.
As far as I understand, the answer is no. There is no equivalent scheme in the UK. I think this is actually an example of where Scotland has benefited from devolution of agriculture. We have been able to respond to clear wishes of the farming sector to provide this scheme, to deliver this scheme, and able to therefore to benefit Scotland's farmers and meet our needs. And it does reinforce why farming policy and future arrangements for rural support need to stay devolved without strings being attached by the UK Government in any form.
Question number 8, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many farm businesses in the Lothian region are still to receive 2016-17 and 2017-18 CAP Basic and Pillar 2 payments.
Ferguson.
For the CAP Basic Payment Scheme, there are zero payments outstanding for the scheme years 2016 and 2017 and 7 businesses in 2018. For Pillar 2, there are 2 businesses due for payment for 2016, 4 for 2017 and 24 for 2018. We are continuing to work with customers to pay out the remaining claims in line with the scheme regulations.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer? Can you confirm absolutely that these payments will be made to all farm businesses by the end of this year? Yes or no?
Ferguson.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the member saying, will all beef payments be made? All these payments. Well, you know, the member really should understand that we are dealing with around about 17 or 18,000 claims for Pillar 1 payments. I gave him the answer that in 2016, the number, and 17, the answer outstanding is 0. 0. In other words, a record is 100% for those 2 years, which is a fair result. Not one I ever achieved in any examination, Presiding Officer, you won't be surprised to hear. But perhaps Mr. Balfour did, I don't know. But what I can say about this is also that there is always a tail. There are always very complicated cases which involve a great deal of time and effort, and I've been involved in overseeing some of that work and double-checking it because we are determined that all payments due to farmers, crofters and land managers in Scotland get out as quickly as possible. And frankly, I think our record in improvement over the last 3 years is one which everybody, apart from the Scottish Tories, recognise.
Supplementary, Colin Beattie.
What arrangements have been made in other UK administrations to make sure farmers and crofters get their basic payments ahead of a no-deal Brexit?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I'm not aware of any other administration in the UK offering a loan scheme or advance payment as yet to farm businesses. Here in Scotland, I've been absolutely determined to give as much support and certainty as possible ahead of a possible no-deal Brexit. That's why, Presiding Officer, we're offering advance loan payments worth up to 95% of anticipated 2019 CAP BPS and greening payments. We've issued 16,600 loan offers worth almost £395 million to the rural economy. We will start payments in early October. I'm pleased to report that as of today, 9,500 farmers and crofters have returned their loan acceptance. Now, I know the officials who are administering this. They're doing a grand job for Scotland. If our colleagues in England would like to learn how to do it, I'm quite happy to arrange for our officials to offer, at a cost, of course, which we will negotiate, the ability to administer this scheme. And I'm quite serious, because I'm astonished that with the risk of a no-deal Brexit, our colleagues in England have not seen fit to make sure that there will be some money in the bank accounts of their farmers, counterpart farmers down south, because of the challenges that they too would face. That's not a fate I wish on any farmers in the UK.
That concludes portfolio questions on the rural economy, and we shall move on to the next item of business.